If you're somebody who has lived in the world the way it was based on the US dollar, and now all of that is changing, the entire financial landscape is shifting right underneath our feet. We have new global reserve currencies coming out. We have new factions of different countries and different entities creating global reserve currencies to battle the US dollar and take that power away from the US dollar. So we're going to talk about what those currencies are, how it affects you, and what the world looks like going forward. So we're going to look at how the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and soon Saudi Arabia, are coming together to create their currency. The International Monetary Fund is creating their currency. The Bank of International Settlements is creating their own system for currencies. Crypto is going to be involved in the currency space somewhere. XRP is potentially going to sit in between all of these currencies as a neutral bridge reserve asset. And that is going to shift the power structure of the world. It's going to shift how finance happens in the world and how global trade happens. So these are big shifts. So let's take a look at these. Before we dive into all of these new currencies that are coming out, we really have to look at how the old world was structured. In simple terms, the value of all of the currencies in the world were tied to the value of the US dollar. And the US dollar used to be tied to gold. In 1971, they broke that tie completely. And now the dollar has been a fiat currency, which means by decree. So the US said it has value, therefore it has value. But what that did is the US could print unlimited amounts of their own currency, and they could buy things from the rest of the world. And the rest of the world was left to produce things and sell it to the US. Because the US was the most powerful country in the world, militarily speaking and economically speaking, nobody chirped up. Everybody fell into place and just followed along with the system. Now all of that is changing. We are seeing the US weaken as a global power. We're seeing the hegemony of their power breaking down. And that's why we have all of these new players that are coming out that are going to change the way that global reserve currencies happen. The biggest danger to the US's power is the BRICS currency, because Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa now make up more of the world's GDP than the US. So effectively, they're economically stronger than the US when they come together. When you add Saudi Arabia into that mix and potentially a lot more players that are going to join this faction, they're strong enough to stand up against the US dollar and not have to use the US dollar for their global transactions. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are coming together to create a new reserve currency that's backed by their own currencies. So they take the yuan, they take the UAE's currency and Russian ruble and all of these other currencies and put it together into a basket of currencies, which are effectively then going to be backed by the wealth of the nations themselves. When that happens, they are going to not need the US dollar to transact for oil, transact for all of the goods and services that they need, especially between themselves. And when you think about it, these countries produce a lot of things for the world. So if they don't use the US dollar for that, over time, the US dollar weakens. And this is a huge part of World War III, because this is a fifth generational war. And a fifth generational war is not just fought with guns and bombs. It's fought economically. It's fought psychologically. It's fought technically and digitally and through cyber attacks. So the monetary part of this world war is the taking away of the power from the US dollar with the creation of these new currencies. And right now, it may not seem like it's a big deal, but remember the British pound? It used to be the global reserve currency. And the US came along and killed its power, and you know where Great Britain is today. It's not so great anymore. Okay Britain. Or like meh Britain. Not Great Britain anymore. Same thing is going to happen to the US when the shift happens from the US dollar. That's huge. So if you're somebody who is saving in the US dollar, or you've invested into the US heavily, or you are hooked into the system of depending on the US dollar's value being maintained for your savings and your asset value to be maintained, then you should really think about diversifying your portfolio, especially when these new currencies come out. This new BRICS currency is not just going to be another paper printed currency like we've had with all the other currencies. It's, of course, going to be a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, which means it's going to be programmable, it's going to be automated, it's going to be much more controlled, and of course, the control is going to rest in the hands of the people who create the currency. Now, it's probably not going to be different from fiat currency in that it will be printed at whim, so it will inflate over time. If you're an asset holder, your assets will probably go up in value a lot, even when you denominate it in the BRICS currency. But this central bank digital currency system makes the global transaction of value much more seamless. So instead of banks transferring money and taking days to transfer and all the BS that we have to go through to get money to move, these things will be able to move within seconds. Now, obviously the BRICS will not be used by the US, so there will be a fracturing of the currencies, but overall it'll increase the velocity of capital in the world, which means increased productivity, which means increased prosperity in these countries. Now, these are countries that still have a huge amount of growth left in the country themselves. Many of them have young populations, and they still need to be developed. So we know that the growth for the next 40 years is going to be in these regions. It's going to be in Asia, it's going to be in Africa, it's going to be in the Middle East, it's going to be in India. It's not going to be in the US, it's not going to be in Europe, it's not going to be in Australia, it's not going to be in all of these countries that have already gone through their growth cycle and they have old, aging populations. A huge benefit of this process that's being called the de-dollarization of the world's financial system is that we will no longer be at the whim of the US for progress being made in other countries. Right now, the US used the US dollar and the SWIFT system and all of these financial systems that they have as a weapon to keep certain countries poor and certain countries wealthy and control the power dynamic. With these new currencies, we are going to see the freedom being handed back to these countries to control their own destinies in many capacities. Obviously, this World War III is playing out between countries like Russia and China and the US. So, Russia and China are very interested in this de-dollarization process. And I don't blame them, right? Russia had $600 something billion of their wealth stolen by the US at a moment's notice because Biden said so. Now, China, India, all of these other countries are waking up to the idea that the next person on the chopping block or the next country on the chopping block is going to be them. So they're coming together to actually fuel this de-dollarization process. The BRICS countries have come together to create a $100 million pool of capital called the Contingent Reserves Arrangement to facilitate the creation of this new BRICS currency. That's just the beginning. Once the currency is created, once it starts to be used for global finance and global transactions, trillions of dollars of capital will be added to this side of the pie, which takes away from the value that's sitting in the US dollar. In simple terms, that means people who are in the US dollar system will have less of the world's prosperity to benefit from, which means the growth that we've seen in the US dollar will decline over time. At the same time, the US is going to have to print insane amounts of dollars to try to pay off the debts that they have, or even just maintain the illusion of paying off the debts. In that process, the dollar becomes worthless over time. The BRICS currency gains value over time, and that is a very effective modality of attacking your enemy. The great thing about the new BRICS currency is that if you're somebody who is invested into those countries, it increases the confidence that you have in the stability of those countries. Because when they're not depending on the US dollar, they're not affected as much by the problems that happen in the US. and they have all of this growth ahead of them, you can invest with more security, knowing that the value is being transacted based on a global reserve currency that is backed by a basket of different currencies. On the downside, the US may selectively stop trading with these countries. As you notice, the US has blocked China from receiving certain machines. The US has completely blocked Russia from being able to transact in many ways with American companies. And there's more blocks coming up. All of this is a natural part of us progressing more and more towards a fractured world where these countries don't talk to each other unless there's a neutral bridge reserve asset like XRP sitting in the middle. The BRICS currency isn't the only new currency that's being made. The Bank of International Settlements, the overlords of our overlords, the central bank of central banks, is creating a system called M-Bridge. This M-Bridge system will also create its own currency that will be backed by the assets and currencies of the partners who choose to participate in this system. That is the process of the power shifting from the US to a global one world power. So now the Bank of International Settlements will tell the central banks of the world what they need to do with their policies, and then they will force central banks and other entities to use their M-Bridge currency over the US, effectively shifting that power dynamic over to the Bank of International Settlements. Now, these are bankers, and bankers have never caused any problem in the world. They're absolutely sweethearts. I'm just kidding. That's a problem. The power is going to the central bankers, and the central bankers of central bankers. They're even worse than central bankers. They're central bankers squared. That shift is also going to put a fence around the average person from being able to interact with the financial system. For example, these CBDCs that they're creating that are going to be part of the M-Bridge system may be programmed to not let you buy crypto. They may be programmed to not let you eat certain types of meat or not let you accrue the value in these CBDCs because they could have negative interest rates. So if you hold it over time, your money disappears. All of these are very scary concepts when it comes to the future of the world. Now, the US dollar is not going to be any better. The US dollar is also being turned into a central bank digital currency. And if anything, I'm more scared of the way America does things than all the countries coming together and doing things. So let's see how that plays out, but it doesn't look good for the world. So as of now, it looks like this M-Bridge platform will be a blockchain-based system. It'll be a ledger that will allow different central bank digital currencies to be issued on that ledger. Now, don't be fooled. This is not a cryptocurrency, not in the traditional sense. This is the technology blockchain being used to issue the same old crap fiat that they can print to infinity that becomes worthless over time. It just makes it faster, it makes it cheaper, it makes it more automated through smart contracts. It's just a new way of doing the same old stuff better, but it is going to be based on the blockchain technology. And almost certainly, they'll use that as a reason to trick you into accepting it. Because they'll say, hey, this is blockchain. Come with us. You like Bitcoin? This is like Bitcoin. And the average person will have no idea what the difference is. It's interesting because the BRICS are creating their own currency, yet they are also going to participate in the M-Bridge system with the BIS. So it could be that the BRICS currency becomes one of the currencies that's built on the M-Bridge blockchain. It could be that the BRICS currency is a separate currency, and then they're also using the M-Bridge currency to be able to transact. Right now, it's unclear. We don't know for sure what's going to happen, but in the end, the BRICS currencies are going to be more aligned with the way that the international system is working, because the Bank of International Settlements is part of that one world power structure that is now shifting the old world order to the new world order. So what we know now is that we have Hong Kong, China, Thailand, and UAE coming together to create this M-Bridge platform. Beyond that, the news is still very murky, But keep an eye on these things, because the plan for this stuff is that old adage, slowly at the beginning and then all of a sudden. Because people are not going to just give up the old system and give up their sovereignty and shift away from the US dollar without some massive black swan event causing that to be the case. It could be cyber attacks, it could be financial meltdown, it could be aliens dropping out of the sky, I don't know. But whatever it is, remember that's being used as a excuse to get us to accept these new currencies. But wait, there's more. Not only are the BRICS nations creating their own currency, and the Bank of International Settlements creating their own currency, but the International Monetary Fund has decided to create their own currency. It's called the Universal Monetary Unit. So if you haven't heard, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, are those amazing bankers that give massive loans to countries, and then when the country can't pay it back, they take over the assets of countries. They are effectively economically taking over countries. You should listen to The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which really helps highlight how this process plays out. So this entity, the International Monetary Fund, is creating the UMU currency to battle the US dollar. Now, what that's going to do, we don't really know. But the last time we gave the bankers power, on one side, it created the most prosperity we've ever seen in the entire world. Let's be honest. The Bretton Woods system we've been living in created the best world we've seen yet. On the flip side, it gave all the power in the world to the bankers and the people who have all the money. I think going forward, a similar thing is going to play out, where the power shifts away from the US, it shifts to one world entities, these international monetary funds and the Bank of International Settlements. And once the turmoil is done, then over the next 40, 50 years, we will see another growth cycle of prosperity, where times get good, people live better lives, and the world is better and hopefully cleaner, and we're operating in a system that's less detrimental to the earth, hopefully. China, Russia, and India are scared of what the US has been doing. What they did to Russia is probably what they're going to do to China and India. So they're happy to use the IMF currency whenever possible. At the same time, these countries know what the IMF does to countries when you depend on them. So they're probably going to align themselves with the IMF and use it in selective use cases. But in other use cases, they'll probably use the BRICS currency or the M-Bridge basket of currencies. Again, it's unclear how that's going to play out, but China, India, and Russia are happy to back the IMF currency as long as it gets them away from the US dollar. Now, you can't blame them. The US overplayed their cards. They've used their power to bully around the world and create a world where their fear no longer applies to these massive countries, and that weakening empire is the perfect ground for these new currencies to be implemented. Until now, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, has been pretty much the biggest and only player when it comes to funding the development of massive countries or massive projects within countries. Asia is no longer happy with the way that the IMF does things. So they've created the Asian Monetary Fund, the AMF. That is a competitor to the IMF because the IMF is actually based out of the US, even though it's an international entity. The Asian Monetary Fund is going to pool together capital from Asian countries to develop the Asian countries in a way that's fairer to those countries themselves. Now, this idea was created back in 1997 when the Asian financial meltdown happened, but now it's coming to fruition. Alongside with the Asian Monetary Fund, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually end up creating an Asian Monetary Fund currency. So again, we're seeing many different currencies being created in many different parts of the world to create more economic stability in their own region and less economic dependent on the other regions. But at the same time, we don't know how they're going to communicate. It could be through something like XRP. It could be through crypto-based systems. It could be transacting between these different currencies. Regardless of what happens, Asia is gaining their financial independence by creating this Asian Monetary Fund. And I'm sure the IMF is not going to like that. And the US is not going to like that. So they'll probably try to come up with sanctions or maybe war and other things to try to stop this process from happening. But it's almost certain that it's going to play out. It's just been too long that old system of economic colonialism has been playing out through the IMF. A really interesting visual to see how these countries are realigning themselves was when Biden went to the Middle East. MBS came out and fist bumped Biden at the doorstep and walked him in. And Biden said, please make sure you give us cheap oil. And they're like, yeah, go home. Then Xi Jinping from China came, and they had horses on both sides, and they gave him a royal procession. And when he arrived, MBS gave him a hug and cordially walked him through the halls as one of the global leaders. That is a beautiful representation of what the world thinks of the US at this point. The US is going to fist bump, China is going to hugs and horses. That also means that the Middle East is aligning with China more because they need what China creates and they don't need what the US creates, which is Teslas and some technology, which they'll pass over anyway. That realignment of the world means the yuan is being used more and more for global transactions. Many countries have started to pay for oil in the yuan, and that is a cardinal sin when it comes to how the US thinks about the world. The US dollar has been backed by oil. That's what we call the petrodollar, because everybody was forced to buy oil in the dollar. As more and more countries are buying oil in the euro or in the yuan or potentially these new currencies that are going to be coming out, the power of that petrodollar is disappearing. And as that happens, over time, dollars become as worthless as the paper that they're printed on. And it's interesting. Everybody says money doesn't grow on trees, but it's literally made of trees. It is trees. It's dead trees turned into a pulp and stuff's printed on there. And if you think about it, money does grow on trees. Food grows on trees. Food is money. If there's anything that's wealth, it's good food. So money does grow literally on trees. As the world fractures into these different factions, where you have the US friends, you have the euro, you have the M-bridge currency, and the BRICS nations, and the Asian currencies, this fracturing of the world is going to make it hard for these currencies to transact with each other. Also, when you turn it into central bank digital currencies, which give all of the financial data of those users back to the owners of the currencies, that becomes a national security issue, because no country wants to transact in a digital dollar so that the US has all their financial transactional data, which is more valuable than gold at this point. So what you need is some sort of system to sit in the middle that is not from any of these countries, so that the value can transact between these different countries and these different currencies. Let me give you an example. Let's say the US wants to buy something from China, 100 million tons of steel from China. The US digital CBDC will be converted into a neutral bridge reserve currency or neutral bridge reserve asset. And that asset will be converted into the digital yuan to buy the thing. So now neither has the financial data of the other, and the value can still transact back and forth. That is where I think crypto fits in, because things like XRP are already neutral bridge reserve assets that have on-demand liquidity built in to facilitate exactly this. Bitcoin is like digital gold. So if you want to back a currency by gold, you could back it by Bitcoin. And there's probably going to be hundreds of different currencies, cryptocurrencies, that are going to be deployed in this way to sit in between these different fiat currencies. That's why cryptocurrencies are not from any one place. They are beyond nations. They're jurisdictionless. Something like XRP is a public good. Even Ripple doesn't own XRP. The owners of XRP, the coin holders, are the ones who control what happens with XRP. Who owns Bitcoin? I don't know. Where is Bitcoin? Which country is it from? Everywhere. So as of now, it looks like Bitcoin is involved, XRP is involved, XLM is involved, Algorand is involved, XDC is a part of it, Quant looks like it's a part of it somewhere. Now, don't go buy all of these and lose all of your money. This is not financial advice. This is financial opinion. Many of these cryptos are involved. How they're involved will be revealed to us as soon as this financial system goes fully active, which right now looks like is going to happen by end of 2025, and the deployment is going to play out until 2030. The idea of cryptocurrencies sitting in the middle of these reserve currencies to transact is a beautiful idea. It has many advantages. It allows us to have much fairer transactions that happen. It creates a multipolar world with a balance in the middle so that the world can still function. It increases the velocity of capital because it's not just about how much money there is in the system. It's about how fast that money can move. Because I can do $1 billion of business with $1 if I just transact it 1 billion times. It provides financial inclusion, and there's a bunch of benefits to cryptocurrency. Now, the downside is the volatility of crypto makes it almost useless when it comes to sitting in between these reserve currencies. That volatility will have to settle down, and it looks like it's probably going to settle down by the 2030 at the latest to get to the point where crypto becomes accepted as a neutral bridge reserve asset. Another drawback is that these powers that be, your US's and China and all these countries, are not going to just accept the fact that we're deploying these new currencies. They are going to go to war. That's how they print new money. That's how they get rid of competitors. And that's also their final death throes throughout history before the new system gets implemented. So there's good sides to it. There's also some downsides to it. The next few years seem like they're going to be rough. We're already seeing countries melt down. We're already seeing bankruptcies happening in the private and public sectors. That's going to speed up, and the chaos is probably going to crescendo. Seems like by 2026, but don't take my word for it. I don't have a crystal ball. After that crescendo period, a new financial system will be implemented, which will have all of these different systems deployed in a seamless manner. After that, as the world becomes digital and we get put into a metaverse where we're experiencing digital realities, these digital means of transacting value will show their true colors. Because in that digital world, value needs to move digitally. Even more than that, value will move at every single point. So a lot of people missed this in the Meta demo video for the Metaverse. An art piece popped up and Zuckerberg said, "Hey, let me pay the artist to see this." And the art piece showed up and then it started to disappear. And he said, "Let me pay the artist again so I can see it further." That was a hint towards the fact that experiences themselves in the digital world will require this kind of value to flow in a fractionalized way. So you will pay for every second of experience. Because these currencies will be fractionalized down to pennies or satoshis, let's call it, we will be able to do that. So this new digital currency system is not being built for the world today. It's being built for the next 100 years of humanity, and most of the next 100 years of humanity are going to be spent in a digital, physical, mixed world called extended reality or metaverse or the shit show, some people call it. Now, my favorite contender for the asset that wins out in this whole transition of global reserve currencies is XRP. And here's why. When you have these factions of countries, the BRICS, the US, the whoever decides to break away, they will need this neutral bridge reserve asset to sit in between. XRP is the only cryptocurrency that exists that is laid out in the right way to facilitate that global transaction to happen. They also have something called on-demand liquidity, ODL, which means if I want to transfer $1 billion of money over to China from the US, I don't need to have banks with $1 billion inside. I can just take $1 billion US and buy $1 billion worth of XRP for 3 seconds, and then it gets transacted into $1 billion worth of yuan, and then that XRP goes and does another transaction. Also, XRP is specifically laid out to have a structure where it has banks, it has central banks above them, and then it has a central bank of central banks. It's literally coded like that. That structure is exactly how the world is moving towards today. The Bank of International Settlements will control the policies of all the central banks. The central banks will control the policies within the country. The banks will follow those policies and have the right amount of money printed and given to them. And us, the plebs, will suffer as a consequence of whatever our overlords say. Am I happy that this is happening? No. But am I happy that we know that XRP is a major contender? When you also look at who's backing XRP, it is the who's who of the people who run the world. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the IMF, World Bank, everybody has all of their best people in Ripple and are involved in the deployment of XRP into different countries and different industries. So here's how I'm seeing it laid out right now. XRP will be the neutral bridge reserve asset that sits in between different fiat currencies. On the front end, Algorand looks like it's going to be used as a public blockchain to transact with banks and entities where the data needs to be public. XDC and Corda look like they're going to be creating the private blockchain. So it's going to be for private industry or use cases where value needs to flow in a way that it's not publicly available. There's many other cryptos that will hook up into this financial system, and then the banks will just do what's called the last mile, where they will just go from the endpoints of these systems to transacting with different sellers or transacting with different bank accounts or wallets. The potential of XRP as a neutral bridge reserve asset cannot be understated, because in life, you just have to make a few really good calls when it comes to investing. And like Raoul Paul said, I have never seen a bet that's this lopsided when it comes to risk. Because when I'm investing into XRP, I could lose all my money, and you could as well. So my downside risk is 100%. But my upside risk, when I think about how much value it's going to need to be at for it to transact the hundreds of trillions of dollars of value that need to move on this blockchain, the numbers don't even make sense. And when you combine that with the fact that they're going to be printing dollars out of existence, again, the numbers don't make sense. So that's the kind of bet I'm happy to make. And it's one of the oldest cryptos out there. People forget that XRP has been here for a long time, and it has performed better than most assets in the world, except for a few. On the flip side, the big issue with XRP becoming this neutral bridge reserve asset is the volatility. Right now, we have this insane volatility in the asset prices, and that will need to be leveled off in some capacity. That could be artificial, that could be natural as the market matures. Regardless, because it is a neutral bridge reserve asset and not a neutral bridge reserve currency, it doesn't need to be just one price at all times, right? A dollar needs to be worth $1 at all times for it to buy $1 worth of stuff. But an asset can fluctuate in how many dollars it's worth and how many yuan it's worth. So that volatility doesn't need to go to zero. But the last time XRP did 55,000% in 4 weeks. That kind of volatility will need to be balanced out so that it doesn't shock the global markets as much. The other thing that we're seeing is XRP would give control to the one world government. In some ways, that's a good idea, because hopefully they'll run the world better than the way that it has been run. In history, we have seen these shifts create more prosperity, better quality of life for people as times progress. It's just in that shift where you see a lot of turmoil and a lot of wars and a lot of issues as the breakdown of the old system happens and the new system happens. The problem I have with this whole process is people don't get it. If this is the first time you're hearing this stuff, it's probably a shock to you. So please go and research it yourself and understand it better, because you not understanding that this is playing out means that the people who understand it get all the power. And if anything, they get ahead of these investments. And by the time other people like yourself rush in to invest in these opportunities, you're the one who gets hurt and they're the ones who win out. So now, hopefully I didn't scare you too much. There's a new currency here and a new currency there and a new currency everywhere. And the whole power structure of the world is shifting. We're seeing a de-dollarization of the world. We're seeing a multipolar world that's developing. We're seeing Generation 5 warfare. All of these things, they're concerning for a lot of people. But what I don't want you to do is get frozen with fear in this process. Hopefully this is empowering you to be able to understand the shifts that are going on. The shift of global reserve currencies doesn't happen overnight. It usually takes 15 years or longer for it to happen. So if you can understand it and have a strategy around that and actually get ahead of it, you can benefit. But if you're somebody who just sits in the old system because it's comfortable and it's something that you know, you'll be one of the people that gets hurt. And that's what I don't want. So let's recap. The benefits of this shift to a multipolar, multi-currency world is that there's more economic stability, there's less reliance on the US dollar, there's more autonomy within these different regions. It actually balances out a lot of the fluctuations that we have in the exchange rates, and it potentially allows better decisions to be made for the countries that are in the local regions rather than the US deciding what they would like to do. The big challenges are war. This process almost always plays out through war. This could create a fractured world where different countries don't speak to each other, so business might become harder. Investment from different investors into other countries could become blocked or much less possible. If anything, the biggest risk that we have is that we don't know how this process plays out. And the ones who know how this process plays out are going to do something which helps them take all of our money. The age-old game of markets. So the best thing we can do is just to learn about all of these things and stay ahead of the news.